Welcome to another hot topic. Today I'm talking to Roy Horobin, community campaigner and frequent, even inveterate campaigner and candidate for the Liberal Democrats. Roy, welcome. Thank you very much for coming in. Much to talk about, especially after the by-elections last week, but let's start off with the local. I know that because we've been reporting on STRI News that you've been campaigning about Cleethorpes Library recently. Let's give it a quick update on what the news is there.
Well, I think that links in very strongly with the national picture. The whole reason Cleethorpes Library was potentially in danger of closing, although there are very different messages that came out from the council. And the reason why it's potentially in danger of closing is central government cuts. Something, is going to have to be savings, and Cleethorpes Library was perhaps in the firing line. I was part of a campaign, and it looks like that decision has been changed. Some would say there was never a decision anyway, so...
But Cleethorpes Library seems an perfectly appropriate cut. We're already paying more. We know that in North East Lincolnshire we'll be paying more community tax because of the charges on adult social care. It's going to be going up by 3.98%. People don't want to be spending that money, and the library is in danger because people no longer use libraries. They no longer read hard copy books. The footfall in the library has been going down. This is not the 1950s anymore, where you can go and have a self-educating time in the library. The demand for that library is no longer there.
Yeah, apart from the fact it's not the 1950s, virtually none of what you've said is true. But the Cleethorpes Library is remarkably popular. Cleethorpes Library is incredibly important. Martin Vickers, Conservative local MP, has spoken out in favour of it. The simple fact of the matter is that central government funding can't keep being cut. We are one of the richest countries in the world. We need to look at our priorities. We need to keep up a certain level of funding to local authorities. With regards to social care, that's a massive issue. And there's a clear disparity between... we have to accept, I think, a raising in taxes. We have to accept that if we're going to look after people. But also, we have to look at a fair distribution of wealth, and I think that places like Grimsby, Cleethorpes Hull need the help that, say, some of our southern areas don't need.
Well, you mentioned this, criticise the poor old South, they certainly deserve it, but the fact is that the adult social care is paid for out of local income tax, local council tax, so that the places in the country that have the least tax revenue also are likely to have the most need for adult social care. That's the correlation between poverty and taxation, and poverty and the requirement for care.
Of course.
So it might be easy, I don't know what the Liberal Democrat policy is, to say that the richer parts of the country should be subsidising the poorer parts of the country.
Yes.
And yet a rich part of the country, like Surrey a couple of weeks ago, was struggling and was going to have a referendum to raise its tax by 15%.
Yeah, but there's rumours about that, isn't there? That Surrey's particularly cosy relationship, not just physical proximity, but other proximity to the government, that is all a bit of a... But could I go back to the library? And could I tie it into that? Yes, we should have wealth redistributed so it's fair. We've got to start off from the point of people need help and we must give them help. We've then got to work out how we can afford it. And I'm not just talking about chucking money around, we've got to make sure it's spent wisely. Libraries, if we close libraries, they're an essential service. And we've got a great opportunity in this area to get people into work, to really reduce long-term that burden on that. But libraries are a part of that. We need to increase our educational provision.
You say libraries are an essential service.
Yes.
Are they as essential as adult social care? Because there needs to be a priority of spending.
Did I answer too quickly?
No, not at all. But the one or the other has to go. If you're having to pare down, in that case, what else do you cut?
Well, what you do, you don't. That's what I'm saying. That we fought this campaign, quite rightly, to save the library. But a message has got to go back from North East Links Council, from our MPs, from people like me. We can't keep having cuts like this. The austerity, the cuts have got to stop. I understand the point about balancing the books, but the economy, we've got a high level of employment. I heard only 2 weeks ago, we have enough jobs in the Humber region for everybody, which absolutely staggered me. But we've got to make sure we get people into those jobs. Not only school leavers, but also retrain people who...
But libraries are not necessary for
and
getting
therefore
people into jobs.
I come back to it, they're crucial, because education is crucial. We need literate, numerate people with good social skills. Those are the fundamental things we need.
Why are our schools not producing that? Why do people have to go back to libraries to get those things? Why are our
but
schools not producing?
That would be a nonsense. It would be a bit like,
skills?
I mean, you could sort of say parents, all they do is send their kids to school, that's enough. They don't need to take them to castles, country houses, to the beach. They don't need to do anything like that. Sure, it's the job. No, of course not. It's the job of schools and parents and libraries and all these other functions. I am pretty confident, Hugh, if we were to push away, certainly with me, a big part of my education was the fact that after school on a weekend I was able to walk into a library for free. I went along the rows of books which were well maintained by professional librarians, picked up books. I think it had a big impact.
I'm not suggesting that either of us was young during the 1950s, Roy, but when we were young there wasn't such a thing as a computer in every home. That information wasn't coming straight into our kids'
and again, I think we can just dismiss that argument pretty quickly. Computers, I am a big fan of. We both switched our mobile phones off before starting this. They are tremendously useful. But if you're doing any proper research, everybody knows that Wikipedia and various other things on the internet just aren't good enough. It's great. The internet is very important. It is very useful. But we need libraries and we need books.
One final point on that, you said that that's a priority. You want to pay for the adult social care. You want to pay for the libraries as well, for employment. And you say that it's not by making any cuts, it's by raising taxation, more money through taxation. Yeah. Yet, in a democracy, it seems that the people are voting for the parties that don't want to tax further. People do not wish to be more taxed than they are. They're already feeling it. They're paying 20% income tax, 20% VAT, 20% savings tax, 20% death duties when mum and dad die.
Yes.
So how many 20s is that? It's something like 80% of everything they create is already being taken away. And the democracy wants to stop paying for it.
And I can completely understand that. As somebody who works, and when I look at my wage slip, as many people do, it is remarkable what percentage of that disappears in one tax or another.
Plus the council tax on top of that, which comes out after the wage slip.
Yeah, but I also think I've got a duty, to be honest. We have to look after people. That has to be paid for. We have to pay the people who do that job properly. We have to provide the right facilities.
Everybody has a duty to be honest, Roy, if you're standing for office anyway. But you don't, just by saying that you're honest, you're not insisting that everybody else agrees with you. If the majority do not share your values, then what authority do you have to take money away from them to pay for something that you want and they don't?
I don't, and that's the whole point of elections, isn't it? But one of the things that is very important is that I think there can be sort of reactive politicians who, in effect, always look towards their constituents to say, oh, this is what the constituents want. But that's quite complex to gauge. I think it's the job of people like us between elections to say, this is what I think, here's an idea, test it out. What do you think about this idea? And I think we've got to look very carefully at the whole issue of taxation. What I'd also say as a Liberal is we've got to look very carefully with regards to the health service, as one example, of how we do things. Are there more efficient ways we could do things? But I don't think we can escape the fact that if we want a high level of care, it's got to be a high amount of income. We've got to take on that issue and accept it or not, or accept inadequate social care, which I can't contemplate.
Well, I suppose the political question is what level of social care is adequate there?
I think, again, it would be one of those things that you knew when you saw it, just like you know when the health service is working by the basis of whenever you use it, what you hear from other people, waiting times, you would, and I'm sure there'd be a way of drawing up proper criteria to judge that.
Let's go just talking about the National Health Service. Yeah. It's been heavily in the news at the moment. Of course, it's winter, and so it's under pressure. It always seems to be too short of money.
Yes.
Because people keep dying, which is a statistical inconvenience. Yeah. And this has been under a coalition government with the Liberal Democrats and the Conservatives for 5 years. Another year or so later of the Conservatives alone. They have also been applying austerity and cutting those government spending programs all over the place. And yet they've just won a by-election, almost unprecedented, that a government party mid-term wins a by-election from an opposition party. Hasn't happened since 1982, hasn't happened on this scale since the 1870s. You're a historian, you'll be able to tell me more. How is it that the Conservative Party came out of the coalition winning by-elections, and the Liberal Democrats came out of the coalition with only 8 members of Parliament?
Yes, although I wish I'd got Steve Besant here, Councillor Steve Besant, who'd be able to tell you that the Lib Dems in the last year have won more elections than any other party. So various by-elections, local elections for councils, we have won more than anybody else. The two constituencies that were up last week, they were always going to be a challenge, and that shows that we've got much further to go. The big story there for me is this, the big story for Lib Dems is, the reason why the Conservatives won up in Cumbria is because Labour, I don't think, are anywhere. Labour are in disarray. They're not being seen as credible by enough people. An opportunity for the Lib Dems.
We'll talk more about that after the break. Roy, thanks
Okay.
very much. Join me again in a couple of minutes. Welcome back. I'm still talking to Roy Horrobin of the Liberal Democrats. Roy, we were just talking about last week's by-elections, Stoke and Copeland. The Conservatives won Copeland and Labour won Stoke, putting UKIP into second place. Those are results that are worth addressing in a moment with your political analysts head on. But first of all, the Lib Dems in both those by-elections came a very poor fourth, with only really 2,000 or 3,000 votes each for those candidates. What does that suggest to you about, and these are heavy Brexit areas, both these constituencies, what does that suggest to you about the other heavy Brexit areas of northern Lincolnshire and southern Yorkshire around the Humber? What about in your patch? What are the Liberal Democrats' prospects there?
Oh, well, the simple answer is, I think looking at those results, we've got a lot of work to do. What's interesting is figures keep coming out that something like 47% of the population match my opinions. So the opinions I have, and I would put forward as a Lib Dem, are matched. But somehow we're not managing to communicate that to people and turn that into votes. Labour really should have won both of those elections based on sort of track record and the fact that the Conservatives are in office. So it shows as I've said, it shows the mess Labour are in. To be ruthless about it, Lib Dems need to be looking and speaking up, which I think we're doing, and providing a credible opposition. I think Europe's a good example. You know, we are clearly, and again, it's, you know, clearly the party that are pro-European, but what is very important is we do accept the referendum result.
Well, do you? Tim Farron, your leader in the House of Commons, is arguing for a second referendum.
Yes, but it's not let's rerun the referendum to decide. That referendum was run and the result came out. It was a narrow victory across the nation, but in our area it wasn't. It was a clear victory in favour of leaving the EU. Well, we can't argue about that. I'm in favour of democracy. That wasn't how I voted, wasn't what I argued for, but I lost. However, it's a bit like, you know, agreeing to go on holiday with somebody, and you say, well, I'd like to go to the south of France, a vote's taken, and they say Florida. Okay, great. Well, that doesn't then mean that all discussion is off. You don't get to choose what you'll have for breakfast. You don't have a say in what activities you do. You don't have a say in what flights you'll take. So what it's going to be like for Britain when we haven't left yet, when we actually leave the EU, needs to be discussed. Should we be part of the single market? I would say yes, we should. In our region, the Yorkshire and Humber region, around 50% of our manufactured goods go straight into what is the largest open market in the world. I think there are potential dangers. There's something like £640 million coming to our region from that's going to stop. Well, that's okay if then the Conservative government say that's not a problem. That money will still come to you. It won't come from Europe. It will come from these supplies. Absolutely no problem whatsoever. So there is a real need, and that's what democracy is about. People speaking up.
There will be time enough to talk about Brexit and the nature of Brexit and the nature of democracy in Brexit as well. And I hope we'll have lots of other opportunities in the next 2 years to do that. But right now, just in terms of the tactical possibilities for the Liberal Democrats, you talked about Tim Farron's points on Europe and a second referendum, but that's all we're hearing from the Liberal Democrats. The Liberal Democrats have become, in terms of the public consciousness, the party of Remain or of a second referendum. But what else are they saying? What else are they advocating?
Well, do you mean strictly speaking on Europe?
No, and that's the only presence in the public mind at the moment, since the coalition, since the last general election, especially since the referendum, has been the Liberal Democrat response to Brexit. And I know you only have 8 MPs, so you can't speak all the time about everything. There's not enough for a shadow cabinet there. But what is it? Only Brexit? That's all I hear Tim Farron speak of.
Not at all. And I think that's probably the difference between ourselves and UKIP. UKIP now, I'm struggling to see the relevance of UKIP. The referendum took place, the decision was made. So Brexit is the number one issue, I'd say. So I'm thinking of Grimsby Hospital, and I'm thinking of how we all want the best possible local hospital, as we do nationally. Well, again, how's that going to be paid for? Well, the impact of what happens in Brexit could seriously affect how the National Health Service is paid for or not paid for. So I'd say that's the number one issue. But you only have to look, I think, at, say, Donald Trump's election. Really, the Lib Dems are the very antithesis of all of that. So there is the issue of immigration. Lib Dems have put on the agenda mental health. I'm enormously proud. Norman Lamb at maybe only 8 MPs. But the work that's been done to give mental health equal priority with physical, and the way that argument's being accepted, that's Lib Dems.
Now, very reluctantly, you mentioned UKIP and their own private woes. If I wanted to talk about UKIP, I've got somebody from UKIP here, but I don't want to talk about. Will reluctantly ask you to comment on another party, which is the Labour Party, where you mentioned common ground between yourself and your party and others. There seem to be an awful lot of people in the Labour Party nationally and in Parliament who intellectually and emotionally have more in common with the Liberal Democrats than they do with their own leadership at the moment. Are you hoping to have a vast dissident movement of Labour politicians and Labour votes in the House of Commons to come back to the Liberal Democrats? Is there a sufficient sort of ideological overlap there?
Yes, so do. So move away from, it's very easy to hang on to tribal banners. The Lib Dems are a progressive party who have clear ideas about, and a cohesion. We occupy a cohesive left-of-centre space. It works. There are many people within the Labour Party, in fact there are people within the Conservative Party such as Ken Clarke. I mean, he's so obviously liberal to me in terms of his views on the economy, his views on how to treat people, his ability to innovate. So yes, I think there are people who should consider moving from, if I could persuade them, yes, moving from Labour to the Lib Dems.
But if they were to do so, and if you were to create that party, which you described as the antithesis of Donald Trump, whose name I knew it was going to come up one way or another at some time, but will they succeed? Because it seems that the current zeitgeist in politics is, in democracy on the ground, is that it's either the sort of parties that are defined by one issue, like UKIP, which succeeded in bringing about a referendum, or Scottish independence. The Scottish National Party is effectively the biggest opposition, or the most coherent of the opposition parties in the... who would have thought that the SNP would have 7 times as many members of Parliament as the Liberals? This is a strange thing. How, in those conditions, in that political atmosphere, of one issue or anti-politics can a party that has its roots that go back to Lord Rockingham in the late 18th century, how does that respond to an anti-politics politics?
Well, I think it responds really well, because the problem for me with the Labour Party is that it's rooted in an ideology. You keep referencing the 1950s. And it
was the 1870s there, but
1870s, that doesn't really apply to the Labour Party. But certainly there's a sense for me of, I'm not sure, I always thought of the Labour Party as the party of the ordinary man and woman. The party, it was the Liberals actually who came up with the National Health Service, but it was the Labour government who implemented it. I'm not entirely sure now, logically, of the place of, not just UKIP, but also the Labour Party. The great advantage we've got as Liberals, with our history going back into the 19th century, is we've always been a very practical, a very British party. So concerned with, those principles of tolerance, fairness, a fairer society, but we're not particularly wedded to any particular ideology. Well, that, I think, suits many British people. I think we are a logical choice for many British people.
So it's the party that doesn't have a particular philosophy is the one that...
we have a clear philosophy.
Intellectually sufficiently flexible to adapt to what people want.
But that's a good thing, because what we're looking for from politics in an anti-politics politics era, if that is the case. I'm not so sure it is. Because again, you look back in history and there are certain times when you read accounts saying politics has never been in lower regard. And that's a familiar refrain. So
everybody's been saying that since ancient
yeah,
Athens.
so the idea of an anti-politics, I'm not entirely sure that's true. In terms of intellectual flexibility, yes, I think that's crucial. As soon as you get an ideology that gets fixed and won't change, that sounds a lot like communism, which is not really liberal at all. And as liberals, we're in favour of discussion and different. Well, that's going to lead to shifting and evolving and changing. And I think that is how it should be, yeah. And I would encourage people to vote Lib Dem.
Well, I could only suggest then, if you're looking for that sort of what you call intellectual flexibility, the place to go and inform yourself is Cleethorpes Library.
Absolutely. Absolutely, because we still have a Cleethorpes Library.
Right, I'll let you have the last word on that one. Thank you so much, Roy Horobin. Thank you. Join me again next week for another hot topic.